Tonight is Monday. It's 5:51 at night according to my clock. It is November the 5th, 2016. Sitting here in the our dining room, writing my diary. I ended on page 986 tonight. And I'm going to put my diary away. And I'm going to read The Castaway Lounge by John Bollard. I want to finish this novel this week, and I want to do a review of it. At least, I rarely finish a novel, and when I have finished novels throughout the time I've been making videos, I have reviewed a couple of novels over the last year I've been making videos for BookTube. It's rare that I finish a novel because I read mainly nonfiction, and I read a lot of Christian literature, which I don't really talk about in my videos because the books are very academic, very intellectual, very hard to summarize in a video. So I don't. I was thinking about that because I show you these books that I read in the morning, like I showed that Romans 9 through 16 Reformation commentary, and I'm going through Romans 9 and the Epistle of Romans, which is in the New Testament, which was written by the Apostle Paul. And I haven't really mentioned in my videos what is Romans chapter 9 about. Well, if you read the Reformation commentary, which was excerpts from commentaries written in the 16th and 17th century, that when the reformers would look at Romans 9, they would discuss the decretal theology, the doctrine of predestination, the doctrine of election, reprobation. And that's kind of a difficult subject to talk about in BookTube, when mainly you're in BookTube to talk about books that the general populace reads, or that is secular literature and not Christian literature. Now, I have mentioned over the videos that I've been making, I only started reading secular literature for, like I mentioned in the past, for about 25 years, all I read was Christian literature. Now, I did read, as I've said, once in a while I read a novel by John Updike. Once in a while I read some D.C. Boyle or a Saul Billows or John Irving, something like that. And sometimes I read Jack Kerouac, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg. But most of my reading was in the 17th century Puritanism, Reformed theology, biblical studies, New Testament commentaries, because I went to Bible college and I went to seminary and I taught adult Sunday school for 10 years and I worked for 15 years, and all I had when I wasn't working, I only had energy to study for my Sunday school class and for my own devotional life. I didn't have much energy after working a very hard, physical, demanding job, hauling eggs off truck. When I came home, I was usually exhausted. And all I could read was what I had to teach in my Sunday school class and what I had to read for my own spiritual nourishment. So I didn't really read that many secular books. Now, I haven't worked in for 10 years. And for the first couple of years after not working, I was basically just recovering from work. Work was, my job really was very brutal, and it took me a couple of years to recover mentally, spiritually, intellectually from that job, to get back into my own rhythm, to get back into my own. I went through a lot of things I had to deal with. And then I started collecting once again. I started going to thrift stores. First I started going to used book sales. And then I started going to Salvation Army, Goodwill, thrift stores about 6 years ago. And I've gotten a lot of books over the years. I've always been a bookworm. Even when I wasn't reading secular literature, I was always reading Christian literature. As I mentioned, I read for 25 years. I read theology. I read the Puritans. I went to Bible college. I studied church history, missions. I studied ecclesiology. I studied each book of the Old and New Testament, and I studied every aspect of theology: Southern Presbyterian theology, Puritan theology, Reformation theology. And when I was in Houston, I got into Christian mysticism, Christian spirituality, looking at mystical theology, and getting into Thomas Merton, getting into contemplative life, monastic spirituality. Then I got into the history of biblical interpretation. And then I got into, I've always been studying the history of development of doctrine. And so I read all those things, and I still read those things in the mornings, as I've mentioned. I read, and then in the afternoons I read things like The Castaway Lounge. And I've always been interested in the lives of poets, so I read a lot of biographies on writers and poets, thinkers, journalists, people who keep diaries. I like reading letters. So I'm always, that's where I'm at. And but I have a hard time giving book reviews unless I read a book, and that's why I want to finish reading The Castaway Lounge. Now this is not serious literature. It's kind of lowbrow. It's kind of gritty. It's full of sex and violence, and the people live on a very brutish level. And the story revolves around the murder of a young girl who dies in the novel, and is disposed of in a very gruesome way. And so it deals with that, and the main character is we call him a bouncer, kind of a thug named Applejack, and his girlfriend, who's a stripper, who works in a bar called the Castaway Lounge. And so yeah. And he also makes his money. Applejack, the main character, he's a street fighter, which means that they'll go in the back of a building, like a bar or a basement, and he'll fight anybody, and they all wage money on if he can beat the guy. But sadly, in the novel, Applejack, he gets what we call rum-dum. He gets his brain becomes damaged through all the fights and the brutalness, and he has strokes and he has blackouts. And I think in the end, I don't know, but I would assume in the end he dies of a massive brain hemorrhage, but I don't know. So I want to finish this week, The Castaway Lounge by John Boulder. I want to finish that novel by Anthony Burgess, The Castaway Seed, and give a review of that too, so I can go on to something else. So that's what's going on in my book world today. Like I said, tomorrow's December the 6th. Tomorrow's a Tuesday. I might get some books in the mail tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be writing on my diary on page 987. So there's not much else to talk about. I got a book in the mail, but I'm not really in the mood to talk about it. I did go to a thrift store today. I went to thrift stores around where we live, and I only found a book titled, oh, I don't think I even wrote it down. No, I don't think I even wrote it down. Oh yeah. I found this book at a thrift store. Sleepwalking through history. America in the Reagan Years by Haynes Johnson. So the book is about the 1980s, the time when Reagan was president. It's a very critical view of that time period in American history, the Reagan years. As you might know, I never liked Reagan. I thought he was a flake. And so that was like in the 80s. 80s, I was going to seminary, and we were raising our 3 children. We were living in first Mississippi, and then we were living in Houston, Texas. We lived in Jackson, Mississippi when I went to seminary, and I did my internship in a church, in a Presbyterian church in Houston, Texas, and we lived there until I think the late 80s. We moved up here. Anyway, so until the next time, I thank you for the comments and for subscribers, and tell me what you're reading and what's on your mind. So till next time, bye.